Hello and welcome to Unparliamentary Languages US Election Special, a podcast that was made in Georgia. How are you, Rob?
Tired of waiting. How are you?
Yeah, as I posted today, I've been following this with quite a few Americans on Discord who are friends of mine in another community I'm a part of. And as I put it this morning, day 5 in the big election house. It's not as bad as 2000, but in 2000 I was like 10. So I didn't really notice. I just remember the only thing I remember about 2000 is that Florida was important. And by comparison, we're on day 5. So let's hope it doesn't go on for 35 days like it did in 2000.
I don't think anybody could cope with that right now.
No, I think it's been very tense. I do think things are narrowing to an answer, but we've pushed this episode back just for the listeners. Like, we were planning on recording. We knew we'd already be recording after the election. That was fine. We normally try and record earlier in the week. We're like, we'll wait 2 days. We'll know by then. And what fools we were. And then we pushed it back to yesterday, and then we pushed it back to Saturday with the hope that there would be a big batch of Pennsylvania ballots that would answer something decisively. But we'll get to all of that in the episode that's coming up. Suffice to say, we don't have an official answer at this stage, but we think we know where it's going. We think Biden is going to win overall, but we're going to have to discuss how we got there and how this reflects the polls, which we've been following pretty closely for the last few months. Do you want to kind of set us up for where we were before, kind of recap our polls update from last time, essentially?
Yeah, I think it's always just worth looking back at what we were looking at, particularly 538 and their election forecast. So their model, which isn't... what I will say about 538 is it's not a polling organisation. They model scenarios. So they look at the polls and then they run it through their own computer that tries to weight certain factors and say, right, if the polls are wrong by this much, we think there's a chance of this happening if they're wrong by that much. And they also try and factor in other situations. So, like, Donald Trump is an incumbent, therefore he has a slight advantage because traditionally incumbents have always had a slight electoral advantage over a challenger. Little things like that. So the 538 prediction said that Biden is favoured to win the election and wins 89 times out of 100, with Trump winning 10 times in 100 and one dreaded scenario of a tie happening one time in 100. The polls in general said that Biden was about 8 to 10 points ahead nationally. So you would think going into an election like that Biden would be expected to win fairly easily. You'd expect a result soon. You wouldn't be expecting to wait 5 days for a result. There was also like a potential for a landslide. People were talking about possible flips in Texas, of all places, which would have been, if that had turned blue on election night, that really would have... I think that would have been one of the headlines.
Because that's 35 votes, and we'll get to the electoral college system, but it's big. It's up there with California. It's not quite as big as California, which is 40, I think. Again, I've been looking at a lot of numbers recently, so if I get something wrong, it's because I've been overwhelmed.
No, it's okay. And it's not only the fact that it's big, but it's Texas. It's Republican, right? Like, it's one that sticks in your head as, being a solid red state. So the fact that was even appeared to be in the running at some point, according to the polls, was, would have been a big win.
I don't know how much detail we're going to go into on Texas later on, but just want to say that there are demographic shifts going on in Texas, and it does seem to be shifting more blue. So it's like, we lost that amazing kind of election night story that we might have had out of Texas, but it's definitely one to watch in future elections, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it then, because it is interesting how that state is shifting and how the map in general is shifting.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I think, I don't know about you, but when I went on the day leading up to the election, over here in the UK at least, for the whole of Tuesday, I kind of had this knot in my stomach, a memory of 2016. Being like, I just remember that feeling of what happened, where before the election, I was so confident that Hillary Clinton was going to win. I trusted the polls and, thought she stood a very good chance. And who could who is going to beat this chance of Donald Trump, who's not even a politician, blah, blah, blah. Everybody seemed to go into the 2016 election with what I would say is an overconfidence and an assuredness about the result on the Democratic side. Equally, I think going into 2020, everybody who supported the Democratic side kind of had this horrible memory of 2016, remembering that it could be close, so nobody sort of wanted to jinx it or feel overconfident. I think it was just nervy. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, so personally, I probably was thinking quite bullishly about it. We've been following the polls quite closely. I've discussed it with you. I was more switched on than I was in 2016, so I felt more like I understood where this was going, and I thought I'd paid attention, and I was taking into account the idea that the polls had been wrong before and had therefore been adjusted. So I was kind of going, I think it's probably going to be fine. And then, so I was quite bullish throughout the day until my American friends started coming online and discussing. And obviously, that's where I'm definitely in a bubble here. I don't know any online Republicans who aren't like people on Twitter, like Trump, obviously. Like, I don't know any real online Republicans. So it's very much a bubble, but obviously there was this general sense of dread and worry and concern because they'd lived through 2016 in a way even I hadn't, as someone who'd kind of sat online with some people. So, yeah, I think that kind of tempered my feelings, and I kind of was like, well, we'll see how it goes. And then everything kind of started off going in the way things were predicted, except for Florida, and that's when I started to be like, and I started refreshing Nate Silver's page a lot. And also, kudos to this team on GitHub who have produced a scraper for NYT. We'll get to this way later on, but that has been in my feed for the last 3 days, just pinging me whenever any vote counts come in, which is probably not good for my mental health, but it's what I've been doing. So yeah. I think I started off quite confident, and then I started to go a little bit. But yeah.
Yeah, I think as election night happened, I remember just sort of looking at my phone, and there was a couple of rumblings on Twitter that Florida maybe wasn't looking that good for Biden, or provisionally. But, you can't trust Twitter. You don't know who the source is there. There were people I wasn't, aware of. They were just coming into my feed. So it was like, okay, it would be really nice if Florida went blue, because clearly if Florida goes blue, that's a huge amount of votes away from Trump. You can probably tell which way the wind is blowing.
The other thing to note with Florida, it was mentioned, the reason Florida didn't super concern me when it happened was I went in knowing that polling in Florida is generally quite bad, even with their improvements. So I think I must have listened to either Left, Right and Center or one of the other American podcasts just before election night, and they were like, yeah, Florida, they're not very good at doing polls in Florida. So I went, okay, it's an upset from what we were expecting, but it's not so big an upset that I'm going to worry yet. I also had to get up early for work in the morning, so I just went, I'll go to sleep. And it looks like Trump's winning. Maybe we'll have the reverse of 2016, where it looked like Hillary was winning. Everyone went to sleep and woke up to Trump. So I was just like, I can't do this. I can't stay up till 6 a.m.
I did a kind of a similar thing. I went to bed thinking, I won't wake up. I won't look at my phone until I get up in the morning. And then, of course, I woke up at 3 o'clock, and I really tried not to look at my phone. And then I did. And then I saw the needles, the NYT needles, which had Trump winning in Florida, North Carolina, and Georgia by about 2 points at that time. And those were sort of earmarked by the New York Times as 3 states Trump kind of had to win to get re-election. If Biden won them, then there was a good chance that Trump wouldn't. So the fact that those were all going Trump's way at one point was just nervy. And it looked like, as you woke up on election day, it was clear that Donald Trump had outperformed the polls in several states. It wasn't going to be a landslide, and that he clearly done, something was going right for him. It wasn't, even though, this podcast and other media commentators, had been pointing out lots of times before, Trump appeared to be a president who had mismanaged coronavirus to a great extent, and we felt that would have a bigger impact on the election. But he seemed to just kind of shrug that off in the early days, as it appeared that he had done seemingly the impossible and been able to, turn the presidential race in his favour.
So, we had this expectation from the polls. The polls may have been slightly off, but not necessarily outside of their range of error. What is it that Trump did right? Because I think often we talk about the bubbles we're in. Our view of Trump has not changed, and the coronavirus pandemic has not gained any favours from our view of him. But how is that translating into the electorate voting for him? And in fact, with turnout so high, turnout higher than the last election, generally people say turnout will favour the Democrats. And it seems like he's managed to hold on to more votes than you would expect.
Yeah, totally. I think he was able to buck a lot of the common assumptions that we've had about how certain demographics will vote. So, for example, we thought that the Black Lives Matter movement and everything that went around that would mean that more minorities would vote in favour of Democrats, and they would push away from Trump's, quite aggressive rhetoric against that movement. However, as it turned out, we actually saw a shift from non-white American voters towards Trump and away from the Democrats. Not a huge amount. We're talking like 4 or 5%, but enough that, it's surprising that somebody who can speak like that can still garner that many votes. Non-white voters have been a huge problem for Republicans ever since 2008, really, where the Obama's election, unsurprisingly, was maybe a high watermark for the Democrats, where they managed to capture so much of the black vote at that time. So it might be that pollsters and analysts have been taking that vote for granted, and maybe the Democrats were. They just thought, hey, we're the least racist party here. Hopefully, non-white Americans will vote for us. That doesn't appear to be the case.
One thing I wanted to add there is that in the past, people have generally lumped the black vote as a single vote, for example, and also the Latino vote. So I think, as with anything where you lump them into blocks, there is nuance in there. There's a very good episode of an NPR podcast that I'll put into the show notes when I remember exactly what it was, but it came out just before the election, talking about how there's always this focus on very narrow kind of white voter groups and how the various campaigns have got better at focusing in. Like, you had the soccer mums when Clinton was elected, and now it's, even more granular than that. They have these really specific groups of people that they try and target specifically, and this ties into the whole stuff about social media advertising and things like that. But they still tend to treat people of color as like distinct blocks based on their as I say, like either the black voters or the Latino voters, etc. And that's definitely seems to have been a failing for the Democrats, where they could have gone in and got more Latino votes, especially in places like Florida, where they seem to have turned away from the Democrats.
Yes, certainly. And we particularly saw in Florida, the Latino vote shifted to Trump, where you can sort of break that down into former Cuban Americans voting for Trump. I assume the reason for that is if you've emigrated from Cuba into America, you probably dislike socialism. And if Trump's message was that Joe Biden is going to bring more socialism to America, that would turn off those amounts of voters. That wouldn't necessarily push them towards the cause. I will just pause a second, Wilco, because I've just seen a tweet from Alistair Campbell.
Oh, from Alistair?
I've just seen a tweet from Alistair Campbell that says CNN have projected Joe Biden as elected president, but I don't know where they get their sources from.
CNN and NBC News have projected Joe Biden will become the 46th president of the United States. Yep. That's coming in via Nate Silver and Micah Cohen at the moment. I will screenshot that. So yes, it just came in. It just went to 30,000 in his favour in Pennsylvania.
Breaking news.
Yeah.
Not the first time we've had breaking news on this podcast. We had Boris Johnson going into hospital, didn't we, before?
Yes, we have indeed had breaking news on the podcast before. I'm just going to post that screenshot there. All of my American friends have just gone crazy in the other chat I'm in. So good signs all round. But that's kind of what we were expecting earlier on.
Yeah. If I may be so bold, I think this would probably just be the tagline for our podcast moving forward. It's that, they were probably waiting until news heavyweights like me and you, were ready to weigh in on the election before announcing the result. They were probably said, yeah, they're recording, now let's release it.
Yeah.
So,
Unparliamentary language is recording, let's call the presidency. Yeah, so well, that's good news. Obviously, some counting's still ongoing. We will come back to why Pennsylvania was so important in a bit, I think. But yeah, we'll leave that actual live news happening on the podcast. Yeah.
I think I kind of had one more final point about why Trump did well. Maybe a few. Donald Trump appears to be appealing to working class American voters very well. He did lose a small percentage of white, non-college educated voters to the Democrats this time round, but he still has an unbelievable advantage among that group of people. So that certainly didn't collapse. And finally, this was marked as the COVID election. We've talked about how Donald Trump's potential mismanagement of the situation has led to, a large amount of deaths in America. And it was one of Joe Biden's key talking points. We assumed that would push the other big issue that's always an issue at elections, the economy, to one side. Yeah, we know. Yeah.
I'm just checking.
Yeah.
We do. Just to add in, as I hear your lady wife coming in and informing us. But ABC News has just called it, as has AP. So that's pretty much everyone except Fox. So yeah. I think that's probably it. Which is good to know. I don't need to be refreshing these pages for the next 6 days.
Yeah. I have
He's
this
just gone
feeling.
for 273 to win. There you go.
Hooray! Okay, it's not on my BBC yet, but
yeah, no, not bad. We timed our recording perfectly then. New York is very loud, according to my friend.
But anyway, my final point on Trump is that we'd all forgotten about the economy, essentially, and the economy was pretty good under Trump. Apparently about I saw something the other day that said about 56% of people felt that they were now financially better off under Donald Trump, under his sort of tax cuts, and particularly amongst richer Americans, they certainly see the appeal of a president who gives them tax cuts, rather than a Joe Biden presidency that might see the rise of more tax rises to pay for social plans, Medicare, etc., etc. So, I think a lot of us, particularly on the left, went into this election thinking, oh my goodness, how could you vote for Donald Trump? He said all these awful things. He's mismanaged this crisis. Surely he's going to lose votes. But we did kind of forget what other people saw as the positives of Donald Trump when they kind of pushed the personality of Donald Trump to the side. I don't know what the best way to, how can you vote for Donald Trump as president if you don't like his personality that much? I get the feeling, and this is purely just a feeling, that there were a lot of Republicans who voted for Donald Trump because of the policies that he enforced rather than his Twitter rants and his misdirections and his various unpresidential way of handling things. So that is why this election, in my opinion, wasn't a landslide, and why Trump was able to raise, his own vote share and raise turnout for Republicans still on a massive scale. Yeah.
And I think people are going to be dissecting the polls, dissecting this information and why people vote for Trump. Again, I'd point you to there's a list an arm long of various podcasts I've been listening to the last week, especially the last few days, as I wanted any insights into what would happen, although I did think it was going the way it's just gone. Update BBC News have also called it now, and they were being very, very cautious. There we go. I think there's going to be a lot of analysis. One thing I want to be quite cautious on is, I think you posted something about charts, 5 charts, tell us about how the Americans voted. Those are based on exit polls, and the actual full information takes us 18 months to get hold of. So we won't truly be able to pick apart, demographic information for over a year and a half. And so there's definitely some stuff we can start looking at, but it's not based on a perfect poll in the same way an exit poll is not the same as the votes themselves. But yeah, it definitely seems like Trump did a lot better than people were expecting. Again, and maybe a bit of the incumbent effect. The problem is the plural of anecdote is not data, but there are a lot of good anecdotes on these podcasts where you have people talking about how, you have people who they actually had an example of someone who was like essentially hiding because they were an immigrant and they were going to be removed from the country, and they still said they'd vote Trump, and they gave their reasoning. And like, I think it's very important to listen to those stories and humanize why those people have made those decisions, because if you don't understand that, you're never going to win people over to your side, especially as things in the US are going more partisan, seemingly, and the same here in the UK. Like, you can't just come in and say, well, you're an idiot and you're wrong. That will only make people embed in their particular ideas, and if they're Trump voters, continue to vote Trump, etc. You need to kind of come together, and that's why I think it's been good. You've seen the speeches from Biden being very conciliatory, he's like, we're going to heal America, this kind of stuff, and that's the right kind of moves for a politician to be making at this point. And hopefully we will see America become less partisan. I mean, I'd love to see it. But we'll see what happens, obviously, going into a Biden presidency as we move forward. Let's move on to the roller coaster that was the last 5 days, which we now have an answer to. So Trump was doing well at the start of the night, and so this is kind of the inverse of the Hillary doing well at the start of the night and then going to Trump. Why is it turned out that way? Because I know that we know more mail-in votes may be Democratic, etc., and those get counted later or last for various reasons. But maybe explain why, if lots of Democratic places were coming in early last time, we actually had a lot of Republican places coming in, or a lot of Republican-leaning places this time at the start, and then it started to shift. And also, where did it shift?
Yeah, so I think the main shift is just the mail voting. I haven't seen another reason for, that's why there was this late push for the Democrats. I think Republicans' results maybe this time came in earlier because if you are getting results from rural counties, and rural counties appear to be pushing further towards a Republican side than a Democratic side, they'll come in first, you'll count those, and it'll appear like the Republicans have a lead in that state. Even if people decided to vote in person, those ones in the cities, they'll have far larger vote counts, therefore they'll probably come in later in the night anyway. Add on top of that the fact that you've got lots of mail-in votes, which appear to be, particularly in places like Pennsylvania, disproportionately Democrat. That means that it can create this illusion of a two-horse race where one candidate appears to be ahead and the other one catches them up, which is kind of, we'll get onto it later, but that's the main Donald Trump complaint, isn't it? That, I was leading, where did they find these votes from to overtake Donald Trump? The point is that they didn't find the results anywhere. All the votes have already been tallied. It's almost like everybody voted at the same time on the same day, which they did, but you just can't count them at the same time. That's why it gives this sort of like illusion of back and forth. One of the reasons why those mail votes are overwhelmingly Democratic is probably because of the way that the candidates promoted the safe way to vote. We know that Donald Trump put a lot of doubt in people's minds about the validity of mail-in votes. It was one of his constant refrains during the election campaign, saying that, that it was unsafe, that it increased voter fraud, even though there are, despite the attempts of Twitter and every major media news organization to inform voters that no, there is no voter fraud essentially associated with mail-in ballots. The message appeared to be taken up by Trump supporters who would go to vote in person rather than mailing, whereas Democrats did have faith in the mail-in system. And maybe if you can link that to the effect of the corona pandemic there as well. It appears that, I don't know why the coronavirus is being politicized in left or right terms, and that is one thing that personally frustrates me. But it does appear that, Democrats wanted to be safer, avoid, places on polling days. The safest way to cast your vote is by mail. and also, as we've been talking about before, there seems to be very few floating or independent voters this time. A lot of people have made up their mind in advance. I imagine that a lot of Democrats have known since 2016 that they didn't want Donald Trump as their president and have just been waiting for the earliest possible convenience to send a vote in that might get him out of office. That's why I imagine that loads of people did that in their droves. So that's kind of, I think that's the big picture of those, states that started to turn slowly back for Biden. So you've got Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was one where Biden was behind by a lot on election night, but because of the overwhelming amount of mail-in ballots and the ones that come from very strong Democratic areas like Philadelphia, which I think was polling at about 80% for Biden, which seems to be like a crazy big amount and like a crazy big difference in the cities. That's what can cause such a huge swing.
I will share now this link to this amazing GitHub site that appeared. And there's a testament to the people who created it. You can check more on their GitHub repo. But they basically started scraping the New York Times data, which was coming in, the New York Times has a map. They show you how many are left to count, etc. But it's very simplified. And so they started tracking and scraping that data and producing this website that has, it looks so much better than it did 2 days ago when it started. And it was just a very simple votes in, margin and percentages. And it started to show you the trend that people had to keep up. So it would say Georgia, for example, which is looking like it will just be narrowly staying towards Biden with about 7,000 votes at the moment. It would say Trump needs 70% of the incoming remaining votes, and now Trump is averaging 30%. So it gave you a very good understanding of how votes were affecting things, and by doing a rolling average of the last 30,000 votes to be called, it generally smoothed out any real problems. So if you saw a sudden load of Trump votes come in for a particularly Republican county, you wouldn't be worried, which was quite nice for soothing the nerves. But also, as you say, you see how they were coming in. If I just expand Pennsylvania, which is currently shrunk on here, let's start Pennsylvania where it started to tip. Well, probably any time from 2 days ago when there were about 300,000 votes still to count. There was a margin of about 50,000 towards Trump. And each set of votes that was coming in was between 70 to 80% Biden. And then you get some counties coming in 87% Biden, 87% again. And then, it was kind of all over at that point, and it started to just keep going. And Trump needed to get 54%, 55% of the vote from then on. And he was just averaging less than 30 in every single bundle of votes that came in pretty much. It's not surprising if you've been following numbers like that this is how it's gone. And that's the kind of thing they'll be following in the decision desks around the US. And it's been interesting to watch it from that kind of angle, and would definitely recommend people going and looking at this website, which is still updating because votes are still coming in. So
that is an incredible website. I wish I'd known about this before. 538 had been my place to be, and they've been doing a bit of the numbers because kind of with election, it's always about the numbers, isn't it? That's the pure data of it. It's for me, it's why I love cricket, because it's all numbers. And this is again, okay, Trump is, sure, Trump is 190 for 7, chasing 230, but it's a very sticky wicket. And actually, the bowler's on fire. He's taken 2 wickets in the last 5 balls. Anyway, I'll move away from that cricket analogy. Tom Holland did a wonderful cricket analogy on Twitter.
I did see that. That was shared to me as well. Multiple discussions about how in a proper democracy you wouldn't have the electoral college, but you'd have someone having to make an agreement with both sides before going and kissing the Queen's hand, and then searching around for bombs, and then picking up the ceremonial mace, as happens in all good democracies.
Of course, yeah.
Twitter has been great. I try not to stay on Twitter too often, but Twitter has been both hilarious and necessary the last 5 days to get me through this.
It's the constant scroll, isn't it? It's just that's what I've been doing. Just there was a time where it's just okay, scroll, see what happens. Trying to get the latest updates as I can. But that scraper website is incredible. Anyway, moving back to things. So I just wanted to, we've talked about the revenge of the cities, about what Trump was doing why did Trump lose then? Because now we've had this prediction in that Pennsylvania has, called for Joe Biden, and that brings him over the magic mark of 270. Where were there a few things where you can kind of see that, Trump may have had a slight faux pas? We've talked about the big things, but it's even maybe the little things you do that can turn you off a person. So, for example, in Georgia, they used to have a member of Congress there called John Lewis, who was a major civil rights activist, who had notably been one of the ones that refused to turn up for Trump's inauguration. He passed away this year, and as a result, Trump, who was expected to go to his funeral, refused to go. And that upset a lot of people in Georgia. And when the vote tallies came in, one of the batches of vote tallies that actually brought it out of Trump's control and into Biden's control were votes from the county where John Lewis once governed, essentially. So you've got to think that, little things like that might be in the forefront of people's minds locally about why they dislike Donald Trump so much. Equally, in the state of Arizona, which is still very close, I mean, at the moment, that is still very much a tipping point state. It could go either way. I've seen the latest batch of results come in, and Trump needs 59% of the remaining ballots, which isn't impossible. That's one of the ones where Biden might actually slip back out of control there. But anyway, that was a state which used to have John McCain as its senator. John McCain and Donald Trump famously had many disagreements during their time in office, most notably John McCain voting down Trump's attempt to defund some of Medicare and some of Trump's medical plans that he tried to do in 2017. And even after McCain passed away, Donald Trump has not been very nice to John McCain and the McCain family. So that might be one of the small reasons. If you've got Republicans who will vote Republican down ballots, so they'll vote Republicans in the House, they'll vote for them in the Senate, but pick Joe Biden for president, when you've got states with such small margins, being mean to one of the previous senators might be enough to actually lose you that state. So I thought those two things were, worth picking up on. And finally, as I've put down there, Donald Trump has made it, the way he's been able to garner so much support is by having this big narrative of it's the cities versus the rural areas. It's a culture war between these two. And he believed that, if he waged that same war, he would be able to win again because it was enough to get him the Electoral College in 2016. He felt he didn't really need support in the cities. As we've mentioned earlier, with Pennsylvania and places like that polling so heavily in favour of Biden, we're not talking a 60-40 split, but when it becomes 80-20, that is really enough to put a big dent in your electoral chances. So that's why, even though those rural votes came in first, those votes from the cities came in later, and that's what really was the final nail in the coffin for Donald Trump's presidential hopes, and appears to be in Pennsylvania, where we've had that news, which I'm quite happy about.
I know we try and talk in measured ways about British politics, but I feel I'm quite happy declaring that I'm happy about this in the US. It's made my day. Do we want to move on?
It's made my 2020. Let's move on.
So we're talking about how how the electoral map has got slightly changed, probably due to Trump's missteps, as you say, in these areas, and especially in areas where margins have been very close. It will be, if that's what decided it. He was never someone who thought through what he said necessarily. Like, he would always speak off the cuff, but there's a reason politicians don't do that very often. You accidentally alienate a key set of voters. As the vote started to change, how did Trump react to that? One would imagine not well.
Poorly. No,
you have chosen poorly.
Yes, precisely. So he didn't react very well. One of Trump's big outlets is, of course, Twitter, and that's how he's often in the past been able to go over the heads of major news organizations to get his view across. Okay, that was kind of what he's been doing for years now. Maybe won him the presidency. he starts to make claims of voter fraud as a reason why he may have lost the election. Twitter reacts by essentially censoring these tweets. You can click through and view them, but it stops those tweets that essentially try and, claim that they've won states that they actually haven't won when they haven't been projected by the Associated Press. So there was one tweet by Eric Trump that said, "We've won Pennsylvania," which I imagine will be framed on Joe Biden's wall or something now, because it seemed like a terribly bad call at the time.
Not only was it a terribly bad call, but the other reason that's hilarious is it's in line with the famous photo holding up the newspaper that got it wrong.
Oh, Dewey defeats Truman.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very much that kind of flavor of stuff. But yeah, so those tweets are being not blocked, but come with this massive disclaimer under them, which probably isn't helping Donald's temper at all, as he feels he can't get his point of view across. One of the ones that did make it through the filter was just an all-caps tweet saying, "Stop the count."
Yes. I've seen so many jokes based on this. Yeah.
Birthed many memes saying it also could have been a tweet from the Baudelaire children. There were, many examples of Sesame Street's Count Von Count, basically refusing to stop counting votes. And even Southampton football team last night, they they won, which put them top of the Premier League, and they tweeted a photo of the Premier League with just the caption, "Stop the count," which kind of, to me, underlined the ridiculousness of the situation. Everybody kind of realised that you can't just stop something halfway through when you're winning. That's not how these things work. So that was his initial reaction. Then on, is it not last night, Thursday night for us over in the UK, I think it was about 7 p.m. Over in America, Donald Trump called a press conference to put forward his views on the election. Have you seen any of this, Tom? Because did you watch it live?
I didn't watch it live. No, I think
Okay.
it happened. It either happened stupidly late or it happened
At midnight. It happened like at quarter to midnight to quarter past, because I should have been going to bed and then sort of went, "Oh, I'll wait up for this."
Yeah, I think I was so busily refreshing everything. Yes, no, yeah, I was busily refreshing everything, and I basically went, the important parts of his speech will filter through to me via my friends. And so, yes, I basically saw clips. I saw, obviously, the now famous photo of Trump with the giant exit sign in the foreground, which was doing the rounds. I saw bits of his speech, yes. But not that I haven't sat. I mean, he doesn't deserve to have the whole thing watched, in my opinion. If the US news are cutting away from him within a few minutes of him starting because he's wrong,
It was mad and has birthed 1,000. Like, let me see if I can just grab the article here. This one's from the BBC, but the Guardian did one where you don't think you're ever going to stop scrolling, where it's just that speech fact checked. It was one of those speeches that I kind of just watched in like shock. It was like a car crash. He came out and he was very low energy, which is odd for Donald Trump. Okay. And he just repeated these allegations in a downcast mood with no evidence. It was just like things he'd heard off the street. And he rambled on for about 20-25 minutes. It was one conscious stream of thought. There were didn't seem to be any pauses, any cuts for breath, just a pure inner monologue from this man about why it was so unfair that he'd lost this election. And of course, what came with that was a lot of mistruths and lies. And I think what impressed me about how the media handled this speech, you've already mentioned how many news organizations in the US cut away to basically say almost automatically, I think even from the start, he said one of these opening lines was, "If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, then it's up for grabs."
It was this really weird line where, like, because Ivanka also tweeted something similar, and it's like, yeah, I mean, if you count legal votes and don't count illegal votes, that's how an election is counted. So it's like they're trying to toe this line maybe of saying something that sounds safe. Like, I mean, saying you should only count legal votes is an entirely reasonable thing for a normal person to say. But when it's being done in this way to intentionally kind of undermine the legitimacy of the vote, it's wrong. But it's like, I don't know if they thought they were being clever. Like, you see what I mean? Like, by saying it, being like, but it's obviously claiming that there's a load of illegal votes when there was no evidence for it.
Yeah, and it's almost like I don't like to characterize Donald Trump as stupid. The man is the president of the United States, okay? But it does appear to me that when he's talking about legal and illegal votes, and a big part of his complaints is that they are counting votes past election day, he seems to think that's wrong, when actually, like, it's just what happens in every election, that votes are often counted way after election day. In states that are called, or in California, which was called super early because of course it's Democrat, they're still counting votes because you have to count every vote to get the final tally. The only reason why it's not important is because it was called super early. Trump saying that you can't count votes after election day would also disenfranchise all those people that vote overseas, military votes, etc. It's not a new thing, but he appeared particularly aggrieved by it. Why? Because it was going against him. Because he'd seen states slip away from him that he thought he might have won. And I just think it's the fact that it's, he's going to challenge these results. Any politician in his position probably would challenge. There have been a lot of comparisons towards 2000 and how long that fight went on for in Florida. That was an election that was incredibly close. It went down to one state, and the votes were about, I think there were hundreds of votes in it in the end rather than thousands. It was an incredibly tight margin to decide the president of the United States. However, this one, as we've already discussed, is different in a lot of ways. Before Pennsylvania has been declared for Biden, as we've had breaking news in the past half hour, Trump would have also not only had to have overturned a decision in that state, but in Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada as well. Those are 4 incredibly close states, but he has to fight on 4 fronts. Also, you've got things like recounts in general. Recounts in elections don't tend to actually overturn the winner. They happen in very narrow margin states, and there's already been a recount that will automatically be triggered in Georgia because it's so close. But they are still quite accurate. So there was always a very narrowing path for Trump to come back to this. The way he's tried to undermine democracy is disheartening. I've seen on Twitter, and I don't know if you have, examples of concession speeches from former Republicans, particularly John McCain, who notably, when he mentioned Obama's name, the crowd booed, and he worked to calm them and move on and say, first and foremost, I am an American who wants my president to succeed. We will give the president-elect Barack Obama all the help we can to make America great, essentially was his speech. You really don't get the feeling that Trump is going to do the same from everything that's gone on so far. I think only my final point on this and the undermining of democracy is that it hasn't come from just Trump himself. Many Republicans, at least before this result was decided in favor of Biden, have been keeping silent on the matter. Not many have spoken out and said, "Oi, this isn't the way you act in a democracy," which I think is disturbing. And I also think the claim from some on the right is that you on the left, you also complained about the legitimacy of democracy in 2016 and the Brexit referendum, okay? Because some might say that, they thought that the election was stolen by Russia, etc., or that things were influenced in that way. I think there's a big distinction between the two, and it annoys me, and I just want to say it on a personal level, that when the Brexit, I'm going to take Brexit as an example, but you can apply it to 2016 as well. When the Brexit referendum was lost, there were those on the Remain side of the argument that felt cheated, because they felt people had been misled and had voted for things that couldn't possibly come true. For example, that big thing on the side of the bus about, all of this money will go to the NHS. A promise that hasn't been, a promise that has never been made good by any political party after the results of that election. That's why people on the left feel that it's undemocratic, because politicians aren't following their promises. But not at one moment did anybody on the left dispute the results of the Brexit referendum because they thought the votes had been miscast or ballots had been lost.
Yeah, no, the arguments against it were that it was very bad to make a decision based on a non-binding referendum that won by such a small margin, not that any of those votes were incorrect.
Correct, and that they felt that people had been misled rather than the system being at fault. However, I feel that if the result had gone the other way, do you remember before the Brexit referendum that some people were turning up to poll stations with their own pens rather than pencils?
There's always some stupid story like that, but yes, I do remember that.
Yeah, but because they feared that, MI5 were going to take the ballots and rub things out if they were in pencil. Like, that was one of the... And if Remain had won, I still feel there'll be some on the right trying to undermine the system, the democratic system. And that's what really annoys me about what Donald Trump is doing now. He's not attacking, he's not saying, oh, I feel the people have been misled by democratic promises that can never be fulfilled. Promises the Democratic Party, that they can't fulfill. He's just having a go at the system itself. He's saying it's ridiculous. He's proclaiming that mail votes are fraudulent, that ballots are being snuck in. One of the big conspiracy theories on the right at the moment is that software has a glitch that automatically gave 6,000 Trump votes to Biden, and that they can hack systems like that and rig elections. The sad thing is we shouldn't be surprised. Trump has been talked about rigged elections in the past. When directly questioned if he would accept the results of the presidential election, he's been coy or declined to answer. But the fact that it has been happening over the past few days, and unfortunately, even though we're all quite happy now that official press agencies have called the election in favour of Joe Biden, I don't think it will be the end of it for Donald Trump, who I think will continue to fight, sue, and try and put forward this claim that he can win those states back, or the fact that those states were unfair against him in some way.
But I think the big point that you mentioned about how recounts and things like that, I mean, there's nothing, like, he keeps saying, oh, I'll go to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court can't step in and say, oh, half those votes don't exist after they've been counted. You also have to go through a process where things eventually get up to the Supreme Court. You can't just ring up the Supreme Court and be like, hey, like when it happened with Gore and Bush, it was a decision that eventually got up to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and the decision in that case was that Gore wanted the
recount done by hand.
Recount done by hand, yeah, rather than by machine. And in the end, the Supreme Court said, no, you've got to take the result that came from the machines. Which is kind of there is something to argue there. Nothing that Donald Trump and his lawyers have, that they've tried to get past the courts in Philadelphia or anywhere else they're fighting, appears to have passed muster in either the lowest courts. So there's no point that, there's no way it's going to the Supreme Court at the moment. I feel Donald Trump is just using it because he knows he has an advantage there and feels that's one of the aces, one of the tricks that he can play. But yeah, I can't see how he even gets this to the Supreme Court at the moment.
Yeah, and again, the other thing I just want to touch on, you talked about recounts. I know I've seen a lot of people being worried about recounts and that don't count your chickens till they're hatched and all that kind of stuff. But the reason they can be quite confident when you get out of these recount margins. So firstly, places like AP only call a state when it's outside of that range of a recount. So Pennsylvania is now outside of the 0.5% that would allow an automatic recount to happen if Trump asked for it. So that means he's definitely won that state if he can maintain that lead, and it very much looks like the remaining places are going to lean heavily Biden, which is why they've been able to call it now. They've been being very cautious on this call, which is why we've waited 5 days. But if you look back, and I think Nate Silver had a few examples on 538 of how much the vote can swing the other way when you have a recount, it's like 300 votes. So, even Georgia, which is on a knife edge at 7,000 votes, is not going to flip if that recount were to happen. Like, So yeah, there's no really, you can call for a recount. That's entirely fair and allowed, but it's not reasonable to expect it to change the result that much. And also, it would have to change the result in like 6 states. So it's going to be a hard time. But it essentially, that's why Pennsylvania was so important. It doesn't matter once Pennsylvania's called. We've got 273 for Biden, and that's all that matters there. So that's a good way of looking at it, I think. So we've gone through all of that. We probably want to come back to the polls a bit, I suppose. And I think a lot of people are very focused on the election here, and it'll be bigger news in the US than it is over here. But the other thing that happens every 2 years is we have votes for Congress, for the House and for the Senate. So can we have a look at those results, which were actually not as good for the Democrats as we would have expected, given they just won the presidency, and use that to infer anything helpful about what happened with polling this time round?
Yeah, I think, one, the votes in the House and Senate show that the Republicans had they didn't have a very good election. They didn't win the House. The Democrats are still projected to win the House, but they were able to win seats back, and most of the toss-ups went in favor of Republicans. So I think that might show that the 2018 midterms were maybe a high watermark for the Democratic Party. It was certainly a feeling that when you get elections that happened in 2016, where the Republicans took control of the Senate, the presidency, and the House, it's very rare that all of those three are in line, and that paved the way for Donald Trump to make big changes, if he wanted to, within those 2-year periods. Now, as it happened, Donald Trump failed to get many of his campaign ideas off the ground, most notably the push to sort of defund Obamacare that failed in the House and Senate, but it was very close and required a Republican rebellion. I think that was a catalyst in 2018 to really push the Democrats to win seats that they'd never won before. Now I feel the public are trying to push back slightly against that. They like a bit of balance. I think the public do actually want the parties to work together in Congress. We've had a lot of time of deadlock. This is like a personal opinion. But the Republicans were certainly able to, push back in the House and may even get control of the Senate or retain control of the Senate. There are 2 very important runoff elections that will happen in Georgia, and that will probably decide the fate of the Senate and if that goes Democrat. But it wasn't the landslide, the disaster that they were expecting. Going back to the polls for a minute, so we've already touched upon how polls might be difficult to track in certain states. You mentioned that you always knew the polling was rubbish in Florida. And a polling error there means that can throw out a lot of people's predictions about how the election goes. There are also a lot of talk about shy Trump voters this time round, which is kind of a new term for the American audience, and it appears to come over from what we use over in the UK about shy Tories. Most predictably in our 1992 election, where Labour were predicted by most polling organisations to win that election quite easily. John Major actually came out of nowhere and won, and one of the reasons people thought that was because people secretly still like the Conservatives, were too ashamed to say they did in public, so they lied to pollsters. I've been following Nate Silver's thoughts on this in particular. Nate is pretty much pushing back against the idea of shy Trump voters, and I kind of am inclined to agree with him to an extent. For example, when you see Trump voters on television, do they appear very shy? Not really. Most of them like to wear it on their sleeve. And there isn't sort of that, I think, maybe cultural difference in America that means that people are less shy about their political affiliations. Why the polls might be getting it so wrong, and this might be a more worrying long-term trend for them, is that pollsters simply can't reach Trump voters by phone or have these long drawn out, to be part of those polls, it requires quite a lot of, participation from the user. You really want to be in that. So if Trump supporters are just more likely to push away pollsters when they approach or are uncontactable, then pollsters are never going to find out what they think about the situation or how they're likely to vote. they can try and pick up a few Trump voters and put that into their models. Everybody's trying to recalibrate their models and predictions to reflect that of the general populace. But if on large they just can't reach Trump voters, then the polls are always going to be out. So I think that's one of the big reasons, actually, either like a shy Trump or that they're unable to be getting reached. Whatever it is, we've seen that it's consistent in the past 2 presidential elections in particular. Trump is appealing to a huge swathe of voters. We said that turnout went up a lot. One of my personal reasons why I think the 2016 pollsters got it wrong was because Trump was able to motivate a large demographic of voters that had never voted before. And I still think that he is unique in that way, as in he is getting people to the polls who thought once that their vote didn't matter. They believe in Trump. They're willing to get out there. And they've never been part of the political conversation before. It used to be one of the maxims amongst, pollsters, and that is all you can say about non-voters is that they don't vote. So why would I include them in my model? Maybe pushing back about that question about why the polls got it so wrong. The other thing to remember is that, we've already talked about how Biden is catching Trump up in many areas because of the mail-in ballots. We've been focused on those battleground states, but he will also be catching up in other places around the country because of those mail-in ballots, in Democratic ones. So when we look at the final popular vote difference, it's been one of the more frustrating things for people who, want to get rid of the Electoral College, for example, when you're voting for one president to lead the country, just one person, you'd think every vote would count. It's never been disputed that Biden would win the popular vote. In fact, I don't think he's ever been in any of those projections behind in the popular vote. The problem was always going to be the Electoral College. So maybe when you have a look at that 10% difference for Biden and Trump, that might be, maybe not to 10%, but a slightly reduced margin. It will still seal quite a clear victory for Biden over Trump in that popular margin. Also, those polls seem really wrong on election day when Trump has appeared to be winning. As everything catches up, they kind of tend to float towards where the eventual polls were. It's just, the problem was if those polls were out by 1 or 2% and they ticked it just enough for Trump, particularly in those close states, that becomes a normal polling error rather than a massive polling error. So I do think people are very quick to jump on pollsters at the moment. We've had elections in, like the referendum, 2016 and 2020, where pollsters appear to have got it wrong to an extent, but not as wrong as we all thought. And it is another tactic of the Trump organization. I remember in his speech, he said that Trump attacked the polls, saying that those big margins between him and Biden were voter suppression.
Which is not how voter suppression works, for the record.
Which one, it's not voter suppression. 2, turnout was larger than ever. So if it was voter suppression, it failed on a massive level. But I do think Trump is always keen to discredit the polls because he feels that, if he can discredit the polls, he would never have to listen to an opinion poll again about how to make a decision in the White House. And guess what? He won't have to anymore.
Yeah. So I just want to add 2 points there. So one, yeah, I agree with you. I think people are very quick to say the polls are wrong, and I think it's often more accurate. It's like when people say that something scientific is wrong, and it's like, well, no, we specified within a narrow window a certain result that, if you fall outside of that window, then sure, that's wrong. But if you're in that window and there was always a margin of error, sure. Florida does seem like there was probably something off, but I already heard people ahead of time saying that Florida polls are notoriously difficult, as you mentioned earlier on. So I don't think that's the same as saying polls are wrong and bad. But yeah, it does mean you have to be cautious when you're looking at the polls and not assume they'll be the result. But that's always been the case. It's just some people started trusting the polls too much, I feel. The other thing to add was you said about high turnout and all of that. One comment I saw floated was that it may actually be in retrospect that Hillary Clinton was not a bad candidate, that Trump had a certain power that he still managed to bring to this election that bucked trends. And that was part of the reason that he managed to get in the first place. So yeah, that also put effect, like we've spoken before about this kind of, cult of personality around him. Like, I think it's very different to the kind of, you had a very Obama supporters. You always have very a person supporters, but Trump kind of had this wider base that we've been talking about for some time that kept him buoyed throughout his presidency and into this election. So maybe Trump was definitely on to something, but it's not necessarily, there were lots of things going on, changes in tactics and so on. So here we are in this position where Biden has been declared the winner. We're waiting to see, obviously, for all the votes to come in, but officially speaking, the actual result happens on December the 14th when the Electoral College meets and all the electors go and select. But yeah, I mean, if everything is predicted now, that's where it's going to go. But we now have this slightly odd situation in the US compared to in the UK. We have the election, Prime Minister swaps over the next day, because they have this. Not only do they have this long tail for voting, which I know you have to factor that in if it's going to take some time, but because of when the inauguration is set, we actually have Trump sat there in the White House from now until the 20th of January. So what's going to happen in those few months? Trump's a lame duck, I think, is the term generally used at this point, because we know he's going away. The Secret Service and people like that will have set up their protections around Biden as president-elect. And so, what other than ranting and raving on Twitter, until he loses his Twitter account when he's no longer a president, which will be quite funny to watch, I'm sure. Other than ranting and raving on Twitter and, making his talking points and stuff, where does that leave us for a few months while we're waiting for Biden to come in?
Yeah, I think it's a bit scary in the fact that we know that the coronavirus pandemic is only increasing in the United States at the moment, and you would like to see decisive action on that. If the president is going to be in a mood to deal with that, or the vice president and his task force, that's yet to be seen. So I think it's worth remembering that we were in the middle of a big health crisis before and during this election. It has not gone away, and it won't go away just because Trump has lost. So he does have to deal with that. How he reacts, I don't know. But it will be very interesting to see if his mood changes on that, or any inaction on his part, again, could be very irresponsible, I think. So that's the one big thing. That's the one thing that's on my mind most, is that you still have this massive crisis. It still needs to be dealt with. A stimulus package was basically put on hold until after the election because it couldn't get through both the House and Senate. There has to be some momentum behind that. Otherwise, people are going to lose their homes, their jobs, their livelihoods, etc., because they can't afford to pay anything because of the economic effect of the pandemic as well. So there are certainly a lot of challenges for Donald Trump to address up until January. How much he throws himself into that is up for debate. Secondly, I just think that, you've talked about the ranting and raving on Twitter. Maybe the next question is how long Donald fights this. From my point of view, Pennsylvania is called, and if another couple of states go his way, then that only solidifies Biden's.
Yeah, I mean, just again, live update. NYT has just called Nevada for Biden while we've been talking. So not everyone has, but again, that's now 279. And at the moment, and I appreciate this may change by the time this is edited up, but at the moment it looks like it's going to be 306 for Biden if he wins the remaining states that seem to be going his way. So yeah, it could be. It could look like a very large win when we're all done and settled. So it's important to kind of have this discussion now, I think, when we're in the middle of all of this and it's been a bit stressful and a bit worrying and close. It'll be interesting, like in retrospect. It won't look very close because of how the Electoral College works. It's definitely not looking close on the popular vote. So
it'll be the states he's flipped as well, Biden. He's almost flipped all the ones that Donald Trump did back in 2016. It's weird. It's like we're seeing a new set of battleground states come into play now as the electoral map changes. If it was 310 to whatever the other figure is, I can't remember. What did you just say?
I think it would be 306 was what they were saying. That's definitely what 538 are predicting. So that assumes that Trump gets Alaska, which is pretty much a sure thing. North Carolina, which I think is a sure thing at this point. And then it leaves Arizona state. So Arizona is the only one where this may fall through, where the lead has been been narrowing a little bit with the votes coming in, but people still think it's going to go to Biden. And then there's Georgia looks pretty okay now, I think, because I don't think there's any. I think like Georgia, I think they just keep making minor changes. Oh, actually, no, they now have 5. They added a whole 5,000 votes. So Biden won the last like tranche of votes from Georgia as well. So he's got a decent margin there. But the votes remaining estimate has kind of disappeared because they're now they're doing things like the provisional ballots and other things we've touched on that come in later. So they don't have any more votes to count, as it were. They're just dealing with irregularities and things like that. So Georgia is pretty much there, as I understand it.
In 2016, Donald Trump won by 304 electoral votes to 227. So it'll almost be an exact flip back, from what, the Republicans had to what the Democrats have now. So that'll be interesting to watch. The other thing that will just maybe be interesting to watch with how Trump deals with defeat is that there are a lot of traditions set by previous US presidents. The concession speech is one. Another is a letter to the next president, basically wishing them well. There's a whole inauguration ceremony which deals with a transfer of power and, the other president has to be there. It was said back in 2017 how difficult that must have been for Barack Obama to do it with Donald Trump coming into the White House, because Obama was the man that Trump had really rallied against, wasn't it? So that's why Trump got into politics, because he felt he wanted to one-up Obama in a way. I wonder how Trump will be able to deal with Obama's vice president usurping his position and coming into the White House. I think the personal conduct with Donald Trump will come under scrutiny over the next few coming months, and we've always known that Donald Trump is unpresidential. He's not conventional in many ways. It wouldn't be a surprise to me if he breaks convention on several of those things I've just talked about.
Yes, no, I don't think that would be surprising to any of us. It's already there are reports. Oh, yeah, it would be a shame, but there's reports going around that he's like saying he won't leave the Oval Office and stuff like that. And I know that the Biden campaign then tweeted out that it's fine, we won't have to do anything. People are very good at removing people who aren't meant to be in the White House. Like the US departments underneath take their jobs very seriously and they don't care. They're very good at doing this, basically. So yeah. It will all be fine, but it will be a shame if things like that, like if Trump just out of childishness is going to ignore those norms. But yeah.
Oh, so 4 years. Has it felt for you? 40 years? Feels weird. I'm feeling maybe that'll be maybe that'll be next episode, or a reflection on the past, the Trump years. It does feel like an end of an era, right? Like, it's just kind of sinking in, the result. I think that's why I'm saying that. But it does feel like I don't think, because of the turnout Trump was able to get, I don't think this is the end of Trumpism within the Republican Party. I think many might have be felt boistered by that result and feel that, hey, if we get another a bad Democratic candidate, we can come back with this and people will still vote for us. It wasn't I think that's why many Democrats were hoping for a landslide, because if it was a landslide and they won every single chamber, then the Republican Party has to go back to the drawing board and work out a new way to get voters on side. The fact that it wasn't that, and it didn't seem that people were pushed away in their droves, means that I think there is, unfortunately, a future for a Republican Party in the mould of Donald Trump. However, I don't think that it can be Trump again. Maybe that's the biggest question. Can they find another cult of personality person like Donald Trump to take that mantle, or is nobody else going to be considered serious enough or flashy enough or celebrity enough to do that? I think that's maybe the next big question we've got over the next 4 years and looking ahead to 2024.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting to see because that there's been speculation already who would step forwards, so obviously some people are saying Trump will try to run again in 2024. We'll see, if that's what he tries to go for. But I would wonder if someone like Eric Trump or Ivanka could be like the suggestion, because they could go for someone younger who fits into that mold. But yeah, I think it's definitely too early to start thinking about that right now. But maybe something that will start to become apparent in the next year or so. because the US cycle is a bit ridiculous. At least Biden won't start his re-election campaign straight into the presidency like Trump did, but because Trump loves a rally, at least, but Biden will actually get on with governing, hopefully. But yeah, I could see that being the idea, and I don't know how that would pan out. I just don't know enough, but I could see people going for that idea and then them trying to say, because one thing we've noted with the down ballot votes is that where Republicans have fielded women candidates, they've generally done quite well. And so while there might be a turnoff of women from Trump specifically, when they have the option of picking between a female Democrat or a female Republican, it does seem like those seats can swing Republican. Obviously only in battlegroundy areas, but there does seem to be that. So maybe there would be an argument for trying to put Ivanka or someone else in as the candidate and use the Trump name, but while having someone who can appeal to those voters as well. But again, I think it's too early for us to really be speculating on that. It's just a good thing to mention so that people are aware it's a thing to think about. 2024 is only 4 years away. So yeah, hopefully, if all goes well, Biden will do well. The US economy did seem to be doing well despite coronavirus, bouncing back. In fact, that's the thing worldwide, that economies seem to be bouncing back faster than people had anticipated. So, the economy, as I say, it's the economy, stupid. So if Biden can keep a good economy for the next 4 years, he could be in a very strong position coming into 2024. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I think the next challenge for them is to win back those working class voters at a bigger pace than they did this year. That's what the Democrats used to be their bread and butter. That's why they could pick up those Rust Belt states. That's the big challenge for them.
Sorry, I just saw that image you sent me.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I thought that's
very funny.
Maybe make its way into the show notes some way, but yeah.
Yeah, history will record that this was Donald Trump's last tweet before he lost the 2020 presidential election, and that was, "I won this election by a lot," which is amazing. It would not surprise you to note that there are no polls this week. General election in the UK is over 4 years away, as is a presidential election being 4 years away. So we've got no polls to look at right now, which is quite freeing, quite nice. We can just end the episode without polls for once. I don't know what our next episode is going to be on. I know you floated some ideas, maybe focusing a bit more on the US. I'd quite like to maybe move away from the US for a bit, and maybe now that this is over, we can have one of our silly season specials we weren't able to do over the summer. But we'll see. We've got 4 weeks of lockdown here in the UK, so I'm kind of hoping nothing stupid will happen halfway through it because we're in lockdown. But fingers crossed. Yeah, no. I mean, I'm just saying we'll see what happens. Obviously, we react to the news, though with a few days beyond it. It's rare for us to have something live on the air, but I like that we can have a bit of a longer view at things. But if we're lucky, maybe we can throw in a kind of silly season kind of episode in there, or maybe we can ramp up to do a few over the kind of Christmas period so that we're not constantly dealing with the news. But we'll see. As always, you can find us in all the usual places: on Facebook as Unparliamentary Language, on Twitter and Instagram at Unparl Podcast, on Reddit at /r/Unparliamentary. And if you want to go and support us, keep us in microphones and web hosting, you can head over to patreon.com/TTSS, where you will find that there are bonus 10 to 15 minute preamble episodes where Rob and I just chat about life, how things are going for us in lockdown at the moment, and various other things. And those are available to our patrons. So go over there, give us any amount of money, and you'll get access to that special podcast feed. And I think there's nothing else for me to say other than it's good night from me.
And Joe Biden is the president-elect of the United States.
Woo, woo, woo. I don't know. I need some sound effects really there. We'll just go straight to the bongs.
Yeah.
Maybe the sound of people in New York happy in the streets. But yeah, Joe Biden's won. Woo! And that's it. Okay, I'm going to stop recording.
Bye.
Bye. Join Mike and Tom for nerdy conversation with a multitude of guests on the Hat of Many Things.
Say hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
I'm Mark, a librarian and professional wrestling ring announcer.
Cast League of Legends.
Soteros Philbrucato, best known for my work with White Wolf and Onyx Path Publishing on the World of Darkness.
Hi, I'm Jason Carl. I'm the producer of V5 at White Wolf.
Yeah, my name is Johanna Pettersson, a Finnish game designer.